He starts to back up, and they're telling him to stop. They're telling him to stop. And then he tries to drive over some of the cops, and they shoot at him. That's the video. Even the unmasking of a story as untrue doesn't actually change the story that is told by the media. On racial issues, the left's radicalism is being unmasked pretty routinely. This is pretty astonishing. Today, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, apparently, she has now announced she will only be giving interviews to black and brown reporters. Okay, this is just racist. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just racist. If Joe Biden were to say, I'm only giving interviews to white Catholics, everybody would say that is racist and that is discrimination. Lori Lightfoot says, I will only give interviews to people who look like me. And the entire left just kind of shrugs. That's the way that it goes. First of all, it may violate constitutional provisions. She is a government officer discriminating openly on the basis of race. NBC5 Chicago political reporter Mary Ann Ahern took to Twitter on Tuesday to state, quote, as Chicago mayor reaches her 2-year midway point as mayor, her spokeswoman says Lightfoot is granting one-on-one interviews only to black or brown journalists. Apparently, the same message was given to WTTW Chicago Tonight anchor and correspondent Paris Schutz, who tweeted, I was told the same thing. Chicago politics reporter Heather Sharon also tweeted, I can confirm. Okay, that is probably a violation of the law. But the fact that this is even considered a possible political strategy demonstrates how insane the left has become. Lori Lightfoot is considered a mainstream Democrat. And yet this sort of thing is tolerated. Not only tolerated, but celebrated on the left. Meanwhile, false narratives are trotted out on a regular basis, and then when they fall apart, you just never hear about it again. So here's a perfect example. You may have heard, because we talked about it on the show, about this case of Andrew Brown Jr., right? So Andrew Brown Jr. was shot. He's a 42-year-old black man, and he was shot to death as he drove his vehicle last month in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. And you remember, there was talk of riots. There was a big protest that was held. The family did a big presser, and they had people like Benjamin Crump there. And there, they accused the officers in this case of pure murder. Right, here's Benjamin Crump, who can be found at every shooting of a black person by a police officer, justified or not. He is found there explaining that it is actually just dead straight murder. Here is Benjamin Crump explaining that this was murder, and then it turns out, not so much.
Attorney Harry Daniels will put this in greater context. Exactly. Execution. Execution. We cannot continue. Give us a minute.
Okay, so
The streets gonna get justice, bro. You better remember that, Negro. The streets gonna get justice.
Okay, so you can hear people shouting that this was murder and that the cops need to be arrested. And Benjamin Crump got up there and he said the exact same thing. Well, now it turns out that the body cam footage has been released. So yesterday they released the body cam footage. What happened here is that Andrew Brown was a drug dealer. Okay, and they were there to deliver a drug warrant. This is all alleged, right? Alleged drug dealer. They were there to deliver a drug warrant. And Andrew Brown decided to try and run down cops with his car. So here is what the body cam footage looked like. So you can see the cops there hopping out. The guy's in his car. He starts to back up, and they're telling him to stop. They're telling him to stop. And then he tries to drive over some of the cops, and they shoot at him. Right? That's what happens. Okay, so when people say that he was unarmed, a car is a deadly weapon, right? If you run over somebody with your car, that is considered assault with a deadly weapon. Andrew Brown backs up once the SWAT team arrives to deliver the warrant, and then he proceeds to try and drive forward through the cops, which is why the DA came out and said, no, there's not going to be a prosecution. Pasquotank County District Attorney Andrew Womble said during a news conference on Tuesday that they were justified in their actions, the cops, because they had reason to believe they were in danger. Andrew Brown Jr. was fatally struck by gunshots on April 21st, according to the Washington Post, as he attempted to drive away from deputies who were executing a search warrant on felony drug charges at his home. Womble, who previously said the shooting was justified, held the news conference to discuss details of the state's Bureau of Investigation findings. Womble said Brown's attempt to flee escalated the situation from show of force to an employment of force. During the news conference, Womble recounted the events of April 21st. Brown was sitting in his dark BMW on the day officers from multiple agencies attempted to serve search and arrest warrants based on alleged drug activity. At around 8:23 a.m., a detective drove his vehicle in front of Brown's to prevent any forward movement. Two deputies approached Brown's car on the driver's side as two others moved toward the passenger side with guns drawn as they gave commands to Brown. Brown threw down his phone as officers approached closer and quickly backed his car away from officers as one had his hand on Brown's driver door handle. That deputy was pulled over the hood of the car, according to Womble. When Brown backed up enough to the point where he was blocked by his home, he turned his steering wheel to the left toward the law enforcement officers, who were scrambling to get out of the way and yelling for him to stop, according to Womble and the video footage. The first shot was fired during this moment, piercing the front windshield of Brown's car as his vehicle continued to move. More shots followed, hitting Brown's passenger window and rear passenger side door, while his vehicle continued to accelerate across a vacant lot toward a white van occupied by an investigator. Officers fired 5 additional shots. The total time, as you can see from the video, is 5 seconds. Okay, so there are eyewitness statements that suggested that it was much longer, that these officers basically were waiting, and then they just shot him for no reason at all. But that is not true. Okay, it happens to be that in all likelihood, he was trying to conceal evidence, and then he was trying to run over cops. Brown had abrasions on his body that were caused by the shrapnel, apparently, and a plastic bag in his mouth with a substance that's consistent with crystal meth. Although autopsy and toxicology reports haven't been finalized, according to the DA. The footage shared by Womble brought more questions by reporters at the news conference, who pressed him about saying Brown was aiming for officers instead of fleeing. The clips have also prompted more criticism about how authorities handled sharing information with the public. And of course, you have people saying that the footage was cherry-picked. Okay, cherry-picked, that's the video. That's the video. And here's that we've now reached the point in American life where even the unmasking of a story as untrue doesn't actually change the story that is told by the media. It just brings further questions, right? When there's video of Jacob Blake holding a knife and resisting arrest and reaching into his car, and there being a knife on the floorboards of the car, then we are told that the cop still shouldn't have shot him. When there is full-on video of a 16-year-old girl attempting to stab to death another 16-year-old girl while shouting that she's going to kill her, that is still not enough for people. Remember that time? It was so cute when Americans were naive enough to believe that body cam footage was actually going to answer a lot of these questions. And then it turns out that people don't give a damn about body cam footage because the narrative is all that matters. But here's the thing. I think for most Americans, the narrative is not all that matters. When it comes to most Americans, they believe what they see with their eyes. And the narratives that are being promulgated by the media and by the Democratic Party they're just not true. Now, there have been narratives promulgated by the right that are not true. That happens too. But as the masks come off, the people in power are being unmasked as people who are willing to twist fact in order to achieve a political end. And you can see that in everything from COVID policy to race policy. You can see it with regard to what's going on currently in the Gaza Strip with regard to Israel and Hamas. The battle for the culture is heating up. We here at the Daily Wire are making some big moves. So be sure to like, subscribe, ring that bell, because you're not going to want to miss a single moment.